Hello, and welcome to The Art of English, the podcast where we explore not just the rules of the language, but the heart behind it. I'm your host, Alex, and I'm so glad you're tuning in today. We've all been there, that dreaded moment. Maybe it's a job interview, a first date, or just meeting new people at a party. The conversation is flowing, and then someone turns to you, smiles, and asks that simple yet terrifying question. So, tell me about yourself. In your native language, you might have a dozen answers ready to go, but in English, your mind goes blank. You start sweating. All the vocabulary you ever learned seems to vanish into thin air. You end up saying something like, I am Alex. I like movies and food. And the conversation just dies. It's a horrible feeling, right? It makes you feel boring, unintelligent, and completely invisible. You feel like you have a rich, interesting inner world, but the bridge to express it in English is broken. Today, we're going to fix that bridge. And I'm not just going to give you a list of tips. I'm going to tell you a story. My story. The story of how I went from fumbling for words to being able to confidently share who I am and how you can do it too. This is the story of the Story Bank. Several years ago, I had what I thought was my dream job interview. It was for a marketing position at a company I deeply admired. I had prepared for everything. I knew their company history, their recent campaigns. I had answers for what's your biggest weakness and where do you see yourself in 5 years. I felt ready. I felt invincible. I walked in, shook the interviewer's hand, and sat down. The first few minutes were great. We talked about the weather, the office, the usual small talk. And then she smiled, leaned back in her chair, and said it. Great. Well, before we dive into the technical questions, why don't you just tell me a little bit about yourself? And my mind went completely, utterly blank. It was like a computer screen that just showed a blue error message. I panicked. All my preparation, all my knowledge, gone. I started to stammer. Well, I said, my voice an octave higher than usual. I am Alex. I graduated from university. I studied marketing. I have worked for 3 years. I am a hard worker. I could see the light go out of her eyes. Her smile became polite, but strained. I had just described myself as a resume, not a person. I was a collection of dry facts, not a living, breathing human being with passions and experiences. I didn't get the job, and honestly, I didn't deserve it. I hadn't shown her who I truly was. I went home that day feeling crushed, not just because I didn't get the job, but because I felt like a fraud. I had spent years learning English, but when it mattered most, I couldn't even introduce myself properly. That evening, I sat with the notebook and I didn't write down grammar rules or vocabulary. I wrote down a question. Who am I? And I realized the problem wasn't my English. The problem was my strategy. I had been trying to translate facts, not tell stories. And that's when the idea of the story bank was born. I decided I wasn't going to memorize sentences. I was going to collect my own stories. I opened a new document on my computer and I made a list of categories. A time I overcame a challenge. A time I worked well in a team. A project I'm proud of. A funny travel mishap. My biggest passion and why. A book or movie that changed my perspective. Under each category, I started writing. Not a full essay, just bullet points. Let's take a time I overcame a challenge. I immediately thought about the time I decided to run a half marathon, even though I hated running. So, I started building the story. I used a simple 3-act structure. Act 1, the beginning, the setup. My friends were all signing up for a half marathon. I was a terrible runner. I couldn't even run for 5 minutes without getting out of breath. I felt left out and also weak. So, on a whim, I signed up too, mostly out of stubbornness. Act 2, the middle, the conflict and the struggle. The training was brutal. Waking up at 5 a.m. in the cold, my legs ached. There were days I wanted to quit. I remember one specific training run when it started pouring rain, and I just stood there, soaked and miserable, thinking, I can't do this. But then I thought about crossing that finish line, and I kept going. Act 3, the end, the resolution. Race day was incredible. The energy of the crowd was amazing. The last few miles were agony, but I saw my friends cheering for me near the end. When I finally crossed that finish line, I felt this incredible wave of pride and accomplishment. It wasn't about the time on the clock. It was about proving to myself that I could do something I thought was impossible. Now look at that. That's not just a fact. It's a story. It has emotion. It has struggle. It has a resolution. And most importantly, it reveals my character. It shows that I'm determined, resilient, and not afraid of a challenge. So I did this for about 10 different stories. I wrote them out in simple bullet points. Then, and this is the crucial part, I started practicing telling them out loud to my reflection in the mirror, to my cat, on my walks to the grocery store. As I practiced, I started to notice gaps in my vocabulary. When I was telling the marathon story, I realized I didn't know words like grueling, resilient, stubbornness, or a wave of accomplishment. So I looked them up. I was learning vocabulary in the context of my own life. This made the words stick in a way that flashcards never could. About 6 months later, another opportunity came up. A different company, an even better role. I did my research again, but this time my main preparation was reviewing my story bank. I walked into that interview feeling nervous, but this time it was a different kind of nervous. It was excitement. The interviewer, a friendly man named David, sat across from me, and sure enough, after the initial pleasantries, he said the words, "So, Alex, tell me about yourself." I took a breath. I smiled, and I didn't give him a list of facts. I gave him a story. I said, "Well, to give you an idea of who I am, I'd love to tell you a quick story about the time I decided to run a half marathon, even though I was a terrible runner." I could see his eyes light up with curiosity. He leaned forward. I told him the story, the short version, of course, about the struggle, the rainy day, and the feeling of crossing that finish line. I ended by saying, and I think that experience really sums me up. When I commit to something, even if it's difficult and outside my comfort zone, I see it through to the end. I bring that same determination to my projects at work. The entire tone of the interview shifted. We weren't just in an interview anymore. We were having a conversation. He was engaged. He asked follow-up questions. He shared his own story. I was no longer a faceless candidate. I was Alex, the person who ran a half marathon out of sheer stubbornness. I got the job. And to this day, I am convinced that it wasn't my resume that got me that job. It was my story. So what can you take away from this? It's simple. Stop trying to translate your resume. Start building your story bank. Your homework, if you choose to accept it, is to start today. Open a notebook or a document, write down those categories, a challenge, a success, a passion, a funny moment, and just start with one. Write down the bullet points: beginning, middle, end. Then find the new vocabulary you need to tell that story well. And finally, say it out loud. The next time someone asks you to tell them about yourself, you won't panic. You'll have a choice of authentic, interesting stories that reveal who you truly are. You won't just be speaking English, you'll be connecting with another human being. And that, my friends, is the true art of English. That's all the time we have for today on the Art of English. Thank you for letting me share my story with you. Don't forget to subscribe my YouTube channel. Now go out there and start building yours. Until next time, keep learning and keep sharing.